Hello, I'm Merton Anderson. I'm serving as an advisor to the Global Internal Auditing Standards Board and the IA technical staff in developing the new Global Internal Auditing Standards. Today, I'd like to talk with you about Domain 4, managing the internal audit function, and to provide you with a quick overview of what's going on in that domain. But before that, I would like to talk about the general structure of the standards. The proposed global internal auditing standards consist of 5 domains and 15 principles, and 53 standards in all. The 5 principles are purpose of internal auditing, then domain 2, which is ethics and professionalism. Domain 3 deals with governing the internal audit function. Domain 4 is managing the internal audit function, which is our topic for today. And domain 5 concerns how do we conduct the internal audit engagement and services. Domain 4 is composed of 4 principles. The first regards planning strategically. The second is managing the resources of the internal audit function. Third is communicating effectively with shareholders. And then finally is enhancing the quality of the internal audit function's work. We'll start with principle 9. The Chief Audit Executive must plan strategically to ensure that the internal audit function fulfills its mandate and that the function is positioned for long-term success. This principle is achieved through 6 standards. The first is the requirement that the Chief Audit Executive have an understanding of the governance, risk management, and control processes, the key processes and high-level objectives that are used by the organization to achieve its goals and objectives. The first standard involves the requirement that the Chief Audit Executive have an understanding of the governance, risk management, and control processes of the organization. These are the processes used to ensure that the organization will achieve its strategic objectives. The second standard requires the Chief Audit Executive to provide a vision, strategic objective, and supporting initiatives for the internal audit of functions, which is aligned with the organization's overall strategic objectives. Standard 3 involves the development of the internal audit charter, the requirement that the Chief Audit Executive, in conjunction with the board, develop the mandate and document it in the internal audit charter. This charter includes the mandate, but it also includes other aspects of how the function fits into the organization. In this standard, we also see that there are some special considerations given for the public sector because in many cases, this charter does not exist as a charter per se, but may be written into regulations and legislation. The fourth standard concerns internal audit methodologies. The Chief Audit Executive must specify the policies, processes, and procedures to be used by the internal audit function to carry out its work. The fifth standard is the development of the internal audit plan. This is the same as the current internal audit standards, but the idea here is that the plan needs to be very flexible. It certainly needs to be done annually, but it may be done more frequently and revised more frequently depending on the environment of the organization. Final standard is standard 9.6, which involves coordination and reliance of assurance providers, both those that work within the organization to provide assurance and those that also provide assurance that are outside the organization but provide assurance to the board and management regarding the management of risk. This coordination is important because, again, we need to be efficient and avoid assurance fatigue on management. The second principle regards the Chief Audit Executive's responsibility to manage resources so that the internal audit function completes its plan and achieves its mandate. This involves 3 types of resources. Standard 10.1 deals with financial resources. This is basically the budget for the function. Standard 10.2 deals with human resource management with the idea of acquiring the necessary staff and also developing the staff to be able to fulfill the internal audit function's mandate. Standard 10.3 is new and really involves the management of technological resources and recognizes that in today's environment, the technology used by the internal audit function is increasingly important for how it's able to effectively achieve its mandate. Principle 11 involves communicating effectively with the internal audit function stakeholders. This has been emphasized much more in the proposed standards than the current standards. It really starts with building relationships and communicating with stakeholders. This is covered in Standard 11.1, which basically requires the chief audit executive to give much more thought and consideration of just how informal and formal relationships and communications are managed with the stakeholders. Standard 11.2 is very similar to current standards, which basically talks about effective communications being timely, clear, concise, and so forth. 11.3, Standard 11.3 involves communicating results. There are three types of communications that it addresses. The first of all is the communication of the engagement results. Second is a new concept called themes. These are basically observations and insights that the chief audit executive may communicate to the board and senior management from looking across engagements and across other activities in the environment in the organization. And then finally is conclusions, which are overall opinions for entity level or business unit level coming from multiple engagements. This can be regarding adequacy of internal controls in an area, or SOX requirements regarding the adequacy of internal controls over financial reporting for the organization. The final two standards deal with errors and omissions. This is how things need to be corrected, and specifically it does require the chief audit executive to discuss with the board basically criteria of what determines the significance when errors and omissions need to be corrected. And then finally, the communication of acceptable risk, which is in the current standards, but basically says that cases where management has accepted risk that the chief audit executive still believes exceeds the organization's tolerable risk or risk appetite, that must be discussed with senior management and then escalated to the board for further discussion. Principle 12 involves the internal audit function's quality. The chief audit executive must ensure conformance with the global internal auditing standards and continually improve the internal audit function's performance. Notice that this is something that was also discussed in Domain 3 in terms of quality. The idea that quality is not just conformance with the standards, but also involves three principles. The first is internal quality assessments. These involve both ongoing and periodic quality assessments performed by the internal audit function. This complements the external quality assurance discussed in Domain 3, which provides overall assurance to the board of the internal audit function's quality and performance. Standard 12.2 requires the development of performance measures for the internal audit function, basically to determine whether it's achieving its objectives as set forth in Standard 9.2 in terms of the development of its strategies. And finally, 12.3 involves ensuring and improving engagement performance. This is primarily through supervision. Now, this does include some considerations in terms of how you might achieve this in small audit shops and places where there are limited resources. That concludes then our discussion of Domain 4. Hopefully you'll take a look at the exposure draft and comment on it and give the Global Internal Auditing Standards Board your ideas and suggestions.